Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to another episode of New Music Finds. So this is where I like to collect together all the albums that I've purchased over the past week. In this case, 8 albums from this last week here, including some new releases from June 16th, but also a few of what I call catalog albums. 8 total things to go through with you, and we'll do that here in just a bit. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already clicked the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by turning on notifications, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this with a new episode of New Music Finds. So, as we like to do, we like to kick off with brand new releases, and there was quite a few, 6 in fact. So we'll start with that from June 16th. First one up that was really cool that I wasn't expecting to was the brand new John Mellencamp album called Orpheus Descending. And this one here really surprised me. I've not been into the last couple John Mellencamp albums. Can't really say why per se, except I know for sure on the last album, I wasn't that into John Mellencamp's new vocal style. It's a much more gravelly style. It still continued on this album, but I felt it was not as blatant as it was on the last album. So this one here still has that, but I felt that the music on this one was a much more sort of return to form. If you liked what he was doing in the 90s and early 2000s, I think you're going to like the sound of this album here. The other cool thing is Lisa Germano returned. She's the violinist, background vocalist, maybe even fiddle player that played with him through the 80s and into the early 90s. So she's returned, and I didn't realize how much I had missed her sound until listening to this album here. I really think she has put this album over the top. So I have just been enjoying this. I've been on a John Mellencamp ever since, pulling out all my old albums and so forth. I think that should tell you a lot that this one sort of re-energized me in terms of John Mellencamp, and it's a really great album. The first 5 tracks alone are just stellar on here, and it's a great one all the way through to the end. So I do highly recommend this. Check it out. Definitely check out track number 2, The Eyes of Portland. I think is an outstanding track on here, but I also really like track 10, Perfect World. I also thought it was interesting. The art on here is not John Mellencamp. In fact, it's his son Speck who did the painting for that. John Mellencamp is also known as a very good painter, in my opinion, and he does it in a similar style to what this piece here is. But this one and the last album art for One Eye Jack that was the previous album, both done by his son Speck. Just about everything I believe before that is John Mellencamp. Okay, next one up, Steve Lukather, brand new album called Bridges. Although I see this just says Lukather here and on the side, so I don't know if this is more intended to be a band, like Lukather the band, or is it really just Steve Lukather and he chose not to put his first name on it? Can't really say, but I love the artwork for this here. There we go. We got Steve on the backside, and the list of players on here is outstanding. Well, this is what I call, you know, again, a solo album from him. So 9th solo album from him. The Toto guitar player, of course, if I didn't already say that, that's one of the reasons I'm interested in this is all of the featured players on here, lots of them from Toto. Joseph Williams on here doing background vocals. All the leads on here are Steve Lukather, but Joseph Williams being lead vocalist for Toto. David Page on keyboards. He plays on a number of these. Simon Phillips on here. Lee Skylar's on here. Shannon Forrest. Few other people on here, but all those people related to Toto. So in my opinion, it's a Toto album all in but name. David Page, Joseph Williams, Steve Lukather co-wrote most of all the songs that are on this. There's only 8 tracks on here. It's a very short album. I think it's about 35 minutes, but then a lot of bands have been doing this, getting albums down to the time frame of the original vinyl, 45-minute length kind of thing. And you know, again, if it causes these artists to turn albums out quicker, which certainly there has been. We got a Steve Lukather album a year or two back, and we've got another one here now, and David Paich just put one out in 2022. And you know, if we've got a bunch of those things happening like that, then I'm okay with these things being shorter. If you gotta wait a number of years in between, then I want that 60 to 70 minute album that we used to get, you know, through the 90s and 2000s and so forth. Okay, another new one here. Joel Hoekstra's 13. Joel Hoekstra being former guitarist for Night Ranger, now current guitar player for Whitesnake. And I really enjoyed, this is the third Joel Hoekstra's 13 project that he's done, but he's had different vocalists each time. On the first album, he had Jeff Scott Soto and a couple other people singing on it. And then on the last album, we had, I just totally spacing on his name now, but we had a different vocalist. Then on this one here, we've got a more stable lineup where we've got one person doing all the vocals on here. It's Girish Pradhan, and he's from Girish and the Chronicles. I'm not familiar with the band, but I've seen their album and band logo and stuff like that around, and I know several people have recommended that band to me. They're from India, so hearing his vocals on this here, I'm definitely going to be checking him out. But the cool thing is the rest of the people on this, we got Vinny Appice on drums, Tony Franklin on bass, Derek Sherinian on keyboards, and then we got Jeff Scott Soto on backing vocals. He also did backing vocals on the last album. So we went from doing some leads on the first one to doing backing vocals on the last two. Not really sure what that is, whether or not Joel just wanted to get a more band sort of situated thing or what he wanted, but you know, in this particular case, he's doing background vocals on here, and I'm okay with that. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of Jeff Scott Soto's vocals current. I like the stuff he did in the 80s, but he got into this whole different register of singing in the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, and so forth. So I'm okay with it being this way, but I'm really enjoying this. I will say this, this album has moved a little outside of the wheelhouse. The last two were more in the vein of Whitesnake, Night Ranger, what you might expect from him. This is moving a little away from that, but I'm okay with it. I like what it's doing so far. Definitely worth checking out. All right, next one up, Fifth Angel, When Angels Kill. This is the fourth studio album from Fifth Angel. They go quite a ways back into the early 80s. I think even 83 when they started. Put out an album around 85, 86, somewhere in there. This is the self-titled one. And then my favorite of them, this one from 1989 called Time Will Tell. But they got back together and put this one out, Third Secret, in 2018. So they've been back together. But the reason I was pointing those out is that we've got such a different lineup through all these different albums. Early on, we had James Byrd on guitar, along with Ed Archer. Ed Archer is still a current member. In fact, we've got 3 original members on this lineup here. Ed Archer, as I mentioned, John Macco on bass, and then Ken Mary on drums. New members, Stephen Carlson on vocals here, and then inside the album itself, it lists 2 guitar players. I'm going to open this up and just show you because they list 6 people on the inside here. And we got these 2 guys, or sorry, yeah, there we go. These 2 guitar players here, which are Jim Dufka on guitar and Steve Conley on guitar as well. But when I go on Wikipedia, these 2 guys aren't mentioned anywhere on there. And it's not like, I mean, Wikipedia is known to be wrong, so it could just simply be that. On there, though, they list the guitar player as Ethan Broche and said that he's been part of the band since 2019. Now, I love Ethan Broche, and if Ethan Broche was part of this lineup, I'd be over the moon for that. I don't think that he is. I think it's a mistake and something that no one has gone in and corrected, but it's just interesting that Wikipedia doesn't mention these other 2 guys who are listed on inside the album. Now, part of the reason that I was showing you these was that if we go back to this one from 2018, which was essentially the reunion album Third Secret, the only guy carrying over from this, or two guys, we got Ken Mary and the bass player John Macco, who are continuing on. So almost an entirely new lineup and a little bit different sound. Each album has had a different sound. They started off, they were more metal, then they went into sort of the more glam metal, almost Dokken style sounding, and then back to a metal sound and continuing what they're doing here. But either way, interesting music and what stuff that's going on with it. We've got, it's a concept album. They're calling it a double album, although it's 70 minutes, so it fits on one CD. My only complaint in all of it is I don't really care for the narration that's on it. I just want to hear the music. The narration kind of breaks up the fluidity of it all. If they had dropped that from it and just put that as stuff that could have been read on the inside of the album, I think I would have liked it better, or at least kept the narration to a minimum. But there's quite a bit of that going throughout, and I really just want to hear the music from it. But outside of that, I'm really enjoying it. Ken Mary has always been one of the main writers for the group, and he's still doing that, so we still get that style of music coming from the band. All right, another new one. The Alarm, British UK band. This album, Forwards. I like this. I want more bands to do this, where they're breaking it down into the side A and side B, even though it's on the CD. I like to know what is the first track for the side B versus the last track on side A and so forth, because now that vinyl is getting to be so much more popular, that kind of stuff is really being thought about the same way that bands are making the shorter albums to fit on vinyl. They've gone back to that mentality of the first song to kick off side A versus the first song to kick off side B, which falls in the middle of an album. When CDs became so popular, that really was given up, and it was really thought about what is the first song and the last song on album. So I'm glad to see they're getting back to some of that, and I still want to be able to think about that when listening to a CD. But there you go. What I liked about this, and I don't know if he has been involved in any of the past albums, but I saw James Stevenson is the guitar player on here, and he's been with Gene Loves Jezebel. I'm a big fan of Gene Loves Jezebel, so I thought that was a really cool thing. And having him here in this lineup, I now understand why when I listened to this originally, I wasn't going to pick it up, but I enjoyed it so much I went ahead and decided to pick a copy of it up. I think because of him, I could be wrong, could just be a great album in and of itself, but we still got Mike Peters on guitar and singing, so you got the defining element of The Alarm, but you've also got James Stevenson there, which I think is really cool. And while not a new album, Gentle Giant Interview. This is an older album of theirs, but it is a Steven Wilson remix. So I picked it up for that. I really enjoyed the stuff that he's done. This one here is not really my cup of tea when it comes to Gentle Giant. I like the later era of the band when it became a little more of the pop prog, if you will. It's some of their earlier stuff is full on like avant-garde prog, and that's really not my version or what I care or am interested in terms of the Gentle Giant stuff. I like their later stuff, but I wanted to pick it up because of the Steven Wilson remix, so I'm going to definitely give this one a chance and give it a few more listens. But upon first listen, I wasn't digging it. I'm going to have to definitely sit down where I can digest it a bit more and go from there. And I picked up a couple catalog albums. Flash in the Can, second album from them. This is an Esoteric Records reissue of it, so we got a couple bonus tracks on there. I picked up the first one, the debut album from them, because it had Peter Banks from Genesis and Tony Kaye was on there from Yes, and that one was a good album, but it didn't immediately click with me. On the other hand, this one here, putting this on, really blew me away. So I definitely like this second album, the sophomore release, better than the debut. That's just my opinion, of course. And it's only these two that I've heard so far. So of course, now I want to dive in a bit more and see what else the band has done, and I will be doing that. And then I also picked this up, Andy Fraser, twofer album. Got the Andy Fraser Band and In Your Eyes. So 75 and I think maybe both 75, 76, somewhere in that range for both of these albums. This is GOTT Records twofer, all on one disc, so it's not two CDs or anything like that, but hard to come by. I had picked up his 1984 album that was very 80s sounding, but I really liked it and picked this up. This definitely has much more of the sound of where he comes from, which is Free. He was the bass player for them. I don't know if he wrote a lot with them, but this stuff here sounds very much like Free. I could totally imagine Paul Rodgers singing it. So that actually made me like this even more, even though it's not what I was initially turned on by him, which was that 1984 album. I ended up really liking the sound of this, even though it's that more stripped down sound like Free always had from the late 60s. But there you go. Those are the 8 albums that I picked up. Hopefully you enjoyed this run through of this stuff, both the new and the catalog album releases there. Hopefully you got some new stuff as well and are currently enjoying it. Let me know the things that you got. And certainly let me know your comments and all that, and we'll go from there. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.